This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, Bruchim Abam, welcome everyone. Welcome everyone to today's Shimru International Shabbos Project Learning Program. We're continuing in the Malachos. We had a break last week, and this week we continue. We're up to the seventh Malacha. The seventh Malacha is the Malacha of Boirer. And as the Mishnah Berurah writes in his Hakdama to Hilchos Shabbos, and as the Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz writes, that they both say that if someone is not well versed in Hilchos Shabbos, then it is inevitable that they will be desecrating the Shabbos. That statement applies to Hilchos Boirer more than it applies to any other malacha. In other words, when we talk about the absolute necessity of learning Hilchos Shabbos, it in all probability applies to Hilchos Boirer more than any other malacha. And the reason for that, Rabbi writes, is Boirer is virtually unavoidable. Basically, Boirer comes up wherever you may be, whether you're choosing a pair of socks, whether you're trying to set the table for Shabbos, whether you're dealing with a pile of Svarim. There are so many instances where you would think that it seems innocuous and one could be encountering a malacha d'oraisa. So for example, you could have two people, each one is peeling an orange, one of them is allowed to, and the other one is being mechalo Shabbos. What's the difference? The difference is that if you're eating the orange right away, it's perfectly permitted to peel the orange. You could even use a knife. But to peel an orange for later use is a malacha of boirer. You could have two women who are sorting silverware to set the Shabbos table. One of them is permitted, while the other one is violating an Isser D'Oraisa. What's the difference? If you have a pile of silverware and you're setting the table for immediate use, not a problem. If you're setting the table and you're going to go for a little spazier, a little stroll, a little conversation, and then you're going to eat, it's boirer. Or there are many, many examples. For example, Rabbi had actually printed a chart. Eating a cantaloupe or a watermelon, removing the seeds of a watermelon can be and likely is a malacha of boirer. You're eating chicken, you're eating fish, you want to take out the bones, we're dealing with boirer. You want to sort nuts or candies, you're dealing with boirer. You want to set a table from assorted silverware on a rack, you're dealing with boirer. You want to peel fruits, you want to peel an egg, again, you're dealing with boirer. You played chess. Now, why you would play chess, I don't know, but you're playing chess, and you want to sort the pieces. You want to separate the white and the black. That's a big no-no. That we're dealing with boirer. So these are all issues that arise, and one has to know how to navigate these different circumstances. Now, by the way, which siman in halacha is boirer found in? It's found in siman shin yud tes. The way you remember that is when you sit at your tish, so you can read it forward, you can wear it backward, you need to be aware of hilchos boirer. Now, where was sorting done in the Mishkan? After you would thresh, and even though you would winnow and the wind would carry away some of the refuse, there was still heavier refuse, waste matter, that remained behind with the herbs, and these particles have to be removed to allow the herbs to be ground up and rendered into powder. So the pebbles, they're too heavy. You can remove the pebbles with a sieve, and they have to be removed by hand. Now let's talk about what is the Av Malacha, what is the Tolda, and what are the Isurei D'Rabbanan. The Av Malacha is, the Rambam writes in Hilchos Shabbos Perek Ches Halacha Yud Aleph, one who winnows or selects even a dried fig, the size of a dried fig, one is chayiv in Isser D'Oraisa on Shabbos. The Tolda is if somebody is mechabetz, one who churns, that's a tolda, derivative of sorting. Or if somebody removes sediment from a drink, that is a derivative of boirer, or might be sifting. Basically, winnowing selecting, sifting are identical, so why are they considered three different malachas? Says the Rambam that any particular action that was in the Mishkan is considered a malacha by itself. Okay, now the Rambam writes, one who winnows or one who selects, these are from the Avos Malacha. Therefore, even though it's mutter to roll melilais, husk kernels in your fingers, but when you want to blow to separate, you do it with one hand with all your strength. But you don't use a funnel and you don't use a large plate, which are not the typical instruments used when it comes to selecting. The typical instrument used is a sifter or a sieve, but a gzeira you might come to use a nafa or a kvara, a sifter or a sieve. You can't use a funnel or a large plate. Now, one who strains residue from a drink, it's a tolda of boirer, or it might be sifting. So therefore, you're allowed to strain clear wine or clear water with a handkerchief or a basket, but you cannot make a grue, you cannot make a cavity in the handkerchief, because that's the way you do it during the week. You're not allowed to suspend a strainer the way you do during the week. You might come to strain. Okay, let us now basically try to clarify the main principle when it comes to boirer, which is, namely, the three conditions that have to be met in order for one to be able to select on Shabbos. The Gemara Masechta Shabbos on Daf Ayin Daled says the following three lines. Tanu Rabbanan. The rabbis taught, Hayu lefanav minei achalin. You have different foods in front of you. You have raisins, you have peanuts, you have cashews. Boirer v'oichal. You could select and eat. Ubayrer maniach, you could select and leave it. So the brisa begins, you're allowed to. V'lo yivrar, but don't select. V'imbayrer, and if you do, chayiv chatas, you're chayiv to bring a carbon chatas. So this brisa is a stira, what we call minei obey, from the Reisha to the Seifa. The first statement of the brisa says you're allowed to select, and you're allowed to select and eat, you're allowed to select and leave over, and then the brisa ends, don't select, and if you do, you're chayiv a carbon chata. So what's geht done over here? What's going on over here? So the Gemara gives three answers: Rabbi Yosef, Rav Hamnuna, and Abaye. And basically, we're going to see we hold of all three. Rabbi Yosef says, "Boirer va'oichel biyad." You could select and eat with your hand. Boirer u'maniach biyad. You could select and leave it over with your hand. You want to pull out the raisins, you want to pull out the cashews, you could do it with your hand. But kanoin u'vatamchoy, with a funnel or a plate, lo yivrar. You should not do, because that is already using a utensil. But that's not the usual utensil that you typically use. Aval, the Brisa says, it's usher to use a sieve or a sifter. And if you do, you're chayiv v'chata. So according to Rabbi Yosef, there are three levels. To do with your hand, you're good to go. To do with a plate or a funnel, that's an Isser D'Rabbanan, lest you come to sift with a sifter or a sieve, which is a D'Oraisa. So according to Rabbi Yosef, it's all about how you do it. Comes Rav Hamnuna. Amar Rav Hamnuna. Boirer v'oichel oicha mitach psos. You could take the good from the bad. You don't like cashews. You're allergic to cashews. Raisins, you love raisins. You're a raisin guy. So you're allowed to take the good from the bad. To eat, you could take the good from the bad to leave over. To take the bad from the good, you're not allowed to, and if you do, you're chayiv v'chatas. In other words, you're allergic to cashews. You want to take out all the cashews so you're left with the raisins. No, that's a big no-no. So according to Rav Hamnuna, it's all about you can take the good from the bad, you can't take the bad from the good. And then Abaye says you are allowed to be boirer va'oichel la'alter. You're allowed to select la'alter. That doesn't mean for your friend alter. That means immediately. You're allowed to select for immediate use. You could select to leave over for immediate use. However, to select for later in that day, that's like selecting for a storehouse, and that's usher. So basically, according to Rabbi Yosef, it's all about, do you use your hand or do you use a utensil? According to Rav Hamnuna, it's all about the good from the bad or the bad from the good. Good from the bad is good, bad from the good is no good. And the Abaye says it all depends whether it's for immediate or for later. For immediate it's good, for later it's no good. Come the Rishonim, and the Rishonim say that we paskin like all of the above, and therefore boirer is only permitted if you meet the following three criteria. Biyad, with your hand. Oichel mitoich psoil. That's the opinion of Rabbi Yosef. Rav Hamnuna, oichel mitoich psoil is the good from the bad, not the bad from the good. And the third madrega is Abaye. And Abaye says you could select for immediate, miyad. The way I learned it in yeshiva, and the way it's like a shtickle mnemonic, biyad, miyad, oichel mitoch pseles. With your hand, for immediate use, the good from the bad. Got it? Biyad, miyad, oichel mitoch pseles. With your hand, immediate, and the good from the bad. By the way, now what is considered, Rabbi Sai, using your hand? So it's interesting. What about a knife? A knife is not your hand. Or let's say you want to, you have some items in a pot and you sort of want to tilt over the pot and use the edge of the pot to sort of select for you. Both of those things are considered your hand. That is because they don't do any better of a job than your hand. To peel an orange with a knife is permitted. But it's not with your hand. It's not doing anything more than your hand can't do. To tilt over the pot and use the edge of the pot to, so to speak, select and to sift, that's also like your hand because it's not using any, it is not using your, it is not any better, it is not no more proficient than your hand. So again, the only time bar is permitted is you use your hand for immediate use, the good from the bad. Now why? What is the logic of these three criteria? Either you're allowed to select or you're not allowed to select. Why do we allow you to select if it's the good from the bad, you use your hand, and it's for immediate use? Comes Rashi, and Rashi says that to use your hand is mutar l'charchila according to Rabbi Yosef, because it's not comparable to boirer, and you're not going to be chayiv achatas if you use your hand, because since typically breira is done with a sift or a sieve, and it's not done with your hand, it's not similar to boirer. It's just not parallel to the typical way boirer is done. In fact, Rashi says by all three criteria, the good from the bad, that's also not boirer. Normally you pluck out the bad from the good. The good from the bad is just not a typical way to do. Furthermore, for immediate use is also not typically how you select. Usually it's for a later use. Therefore, Rashi is of the opinion that the logic of these three criteria, biyad, miyad, oichel mitoch pseles, is that it's not the typical way to do it. However, the Rajma has a little bit of a different take, and he says that when you do something for immediate use, to eat, it's not boirer, but rather it is derech achila. I mean, it's not selecting, it's eating. Eating is not selecting. Eating is not a malacha. So if I'm eating, when I choose something for immediate use, it's eating, it's not selecting. So the bottom line is, the Mishnah Berurah in Siman Shin Yud Tes says that ve'enoi mutar livrar, it is not permitted to select kiyim ba'ofen sheyizar b'chol hashlosh afanim, unless you're careful in all three criteria. That is the good from the bad, and it should be with your hand, and it shouldn't be with a kli, and it should be for immediate use, because that is not derech breira, but it rather is derech achila. Now I want to share with you a few important applications of boirer. So one common pitfall, no pun intended, is eating watermelon. People don't like the black seeds. It makes them very nervous. They have high levels of anxiety when they pick up watermelon. Some people, I'm not going to take it to extreme, but people have a hard time dealing with watermelon. You cannot remove the black watermelon seeds because that is the bad from the good. So what do? you bite into it, and then when it's in your mouth, you sort of collect it in your mouth, and then you very discreetly take a napkin and you sort of let it out of your mouth in the napkin. But you cannot remove watermelon seeds. Removing watermelon seeds is a Isser D'Oraisa. Now, what do you do if you have a piece of chicken and you don't like the bones? So you might have to actually, in this case, use utensils. I know it's very difficult for people to use a fork and a knife, but they come in handy, especially over here. To take the bone out of the chicken, you can't do. But to force the bone down, to hold the bone down with a knife, and then to pull the meat away with a fork, so you're taking the good from the bad, and you're doing it for immediate use. And it's still considered doing it with your hand, so it would be permitted. However, to take the bones out of the food, even for immediate use, is very questionable. And unless you have an elderly person, one should not rely on that, because, again, that is the bad from the good. Now, let me tell you one more leniency, which is very worthwhile to be aware of. That is, you have a laundry basket, and you have a pair of socks, your favorite pair of socks, that have neon fish on it, let's say, and it's sitting on the bottom of your laundry basket, and you need to get there. You need to fish out your socks that have fish on it. The only thing is, you're going to fish them out. You're basically going to be moving away the bad from the good. That's boira, right? No. There's something called siluk. Siluk means I'm not selecting, I'm removing what I don't want in order to get to what I do want. In other words, I have something on the bottom that's covered. I have pears on the bottom of a bowl. The thing is, there are apples on the top. Oh, I can't take out the apples because I'm selecting. No, you could move the apples away so that you could reach the pear on the bottom. That's not called selecting. That is called siluk. Siluk means removal. I'm allowed to remove. I'm not allowed to select. Let us talk about silverware. So, many men are very smart and they stay out of the kitchen because they could get into a lot of trouble when they come into the kitchen. You know, they might have to set the table. Well, once in a while you got to help, you got to do your part. The thing is, you have this pile of silverware, forks, knives, spoons, and you have to set the table. How are you going to do that? So if you're setting the table for immediate use, you're going to be eating immediately, you're waiting to wash, the only thing, this table is not set. Okay, so it's you need the fork, so you're going to take the fork out of the pile. It's biyad with your hand, miyad, immediate use, and the good from the bad. Right now I want the fork. The thing is, what if you're not eating for an hour, but they ask you to set the table? So there is an eitzah. The eitzah is make a mess to avoid boirer. That's right, I know you love to make a mess. So now's your chance. Your wife's saying, why are you making such a big mess? You say, I don't know, I'm a neat guy, but the only way for me to avoid boira is to make a mess. You take in your hand like 7 pieces, and you, so to speak, scatter them on the table. Now, the isser of boira is only when you're selecting items in a mixture. But now they're not in a mixture anymore. They're strewn about. So you cast them on the table. Now you have a fork here, a spoon here, a knife there, and then you need the fork. Take the fork. But I'm not eating for an hour. I'm not doing boira. It's not a problem. I'm not selecting the good from the bad. I'm not selecting the bad from the good. I'm not selecting. I'm just taking something that used to be in a mixture, but it's not a mixture anymore. That's also a very valuable. So, back to the chess. You just beat your 3-year-old nephew in chess, because he's the only person who you could beat. Very good. So now you have black pieces and white pieces. When your 5-year-old nephew challenges you, you say, I have to go learn something, right? But okay, you just won the game, and now you have black pieces and white pieces together. You can't select, you can't clean it up. So that's also a good trick. Your wife says, why are you making a mess? You have to clean it up. You say, I can't, it's boirer. So that's also good to have in your back pocket. But if you actually want to clean it up, then what you do is you take a handful of pieces, you sort of you throw it so that it's not in a mixture anymore, and then you could take the black from the white because they're not mixed together. Okay, so that's a valuable yediyah. Now let's go to the essence of the malacha, and in this very nice Shimru booklet, they talk about whether you could play with a Rubik's Cube on Shabbos. My shaila is whether you could play with a Rubik's Cube during the week, because I don't know how anybody could ever do a Rubik's Cube, but I once, somebody once came to my house from South Africa, and he brought his son. He was 12 years old, and this kid took lessons in Rubik's Cubes. You could mix up the cube any way you want. Within a minute, he could do it. Mamish, amazing. Me, it takes me at least, I'm still working on it, But, are you allowed to do a Rubik's Cube? Why not? So let's talk about one side. Let's say you want to get one side white. Now the problem is there's bad over here. In the white there are a few. By the way, it's interesting. Anybody know how many cubes in a Rubik's Cube? I see Michael and Michael knows. But you're muted. We'll unmute you for this one. We're going to unmute you to see get this answer. Anybody know?
96.
96? Nope. Michael, you have something? No. So, it's Kaminyan Havaya, Kaminyan Yud Kei Vav Kei. There are 26 cubes in a Rubik's Cube, and they're all held together with a central spindle. So if you just came to the Shiur to learn that every time you see a Rubik's Cube, you could be Mekayim, Shivisi Hashem Lenegdi Tamid, because there are 26 cubes in the Rubik's Cube. So the Shaila is like this. You have one side of it is white, and you have a few yellow squares that are, ruining your white side. So you want to remove the bad from the good. You want to remove the bad from the good, because right now you want a white, you want the whole side to be white, and you want to remove the yellow from the white. Now the truth is, that's only if you're you're a novice Rubik's Cubes guy. But if you're a professional, you can't really say that the yellow is waste, because you want to do the whole square. So you want everything. You want the white here, and you want the yellow somewhere else. So it's not really taking the bad out of the good or the good out of the bad. It's all good. It's a question where you want it. By the way, let's say you have raisins and peanuts, and they're all mixed together. You want to eat both, but you don't like to eat them together. It makes you very nervous, right? Remember, the guy who has anxiety with the watermelon seeds, he also has anxiety when his raisins and peanuts are mixed together. So you're allowed to separate them both. So there's no bad, there's no good. You want them both. The answer is you could separate them both if you're going to eat them immediately. But to save them for later. And by the way, once we're at it, are you allowed to peel an orange on Shabbos? The answer is it's boirer. But you're allowed to peel it if you're going to eat it right away. But let's say you want to eat it in an hour, you absolutely cannot peel it. That's boirer. That is boirer. So even though, okay. So let's talk about the following case. The Gemara in Shabbos says on Ayin Daled, if you have different kinds of food in front of you, you could select it. But and as we mentioned earlier, if you select it, you're chayav achatas. Now, from this Gemara, we learn that boirer is not only when you have good and waste, but if you have two kinds of food, and one you want and one you don't want, so vis-a-vis the food that you want, the one that you don't want is considered waste. And therefore, the Pri Megadim has a very interesting chiddush. If you have two foods, and you want both of them, you just don't want either of them now, you are allowed to separate because neither one is considered waste. In other words, the Gemara is talking about where you have two foods, you want to eat one, you don't want to eat the other, but if you wanted to eat both, however, you don't want to eat them now. The opinion of the Pri Megadim is you're allowed to separate two foods that you don't want to eat now. However, the Rambam is mashma otherwise. The Rambam says someone who selects the food from the refuse or two kinds of food with a sifter or a sieve, you're chayiv v'chatas, not like the Pri Megadim. And therefore the Bir Halacha paskins that it is pashut from the lashon of the Rambam that breira is selecting one food from the other, and each food is then separate. That is breira. It is not permitted unless you're going to eat them both immediately. In other words, Pri Megadim has a leniency that you could select two foods from each other if you're going to eat both, even if you're not going to eat both now. And the Bir Halacha says, not so fast, no way. The Bir Halacha understands from the Rambam that Boirer is separating two food items from each other, and based on that, he argues on the Pri Megadim, who says that it's permitted even though you're going to use it later. And now comes the Iglei Tal, and he sort of agrees with the Bir Halacha, and the Iglei Tal says if fruits got mixed up together, apples and pears, right? It's Tu B'Shvat. And you have apples and pears, and if you want to separate them, and you're not going to eat them immediately, it's boirer. And the Eglei Tal says that if you have two kinds of food, you want to select them, even though you're going to eat them at this meal, if you're not going to eat it immediately, you cannot do it. In other words, the Eglei Tal says, even though you want both foods, but you don't want them together, still, vis-a-vis the other food, food A is considered a waste comparable to food B. So, in that case, in the case of the Rubik's Cube, where you're separating two items, even though you want both, maybe you would say that it is a problem. However, the bottom line is you're allowed to play with the Rubik's Cubes on Shabbos, and that is because they're not really considered a mixture. Why not? Because they're all considered attached to one spindle, they're all considered one entity, they're not considered mixed up, and the bottom line is you would be allowed to use it. And l'maisa, halach l'maisa, if you have two foods and you want both of them, but you're not going to eat either of them now, we are machmir, and we say, do not select the foods. In other words, you have peanuts and raisins, you want to eat both now, but you like them separate, you could separate one from the other. However, if you are going to eat them later, then you cannot do it. Again, you have to meet the criteria that we started with. Biyad, it has to be for immediate use. Miyad, you have to do it with your hand. And oichel mitoich psoiles, the good from the bad. Okay, Marv Rabbi say, especially when it comes to this year, we have to apply the rule, Tein lechacham v'yechkam oid. In no way did we exhaust the full parameters of Meleches Boirer, which in a way is the most expansive subject in Hilchos Shabbos, but just to get some of the basics so that one could further their study, it is certainly worthwhile. Okay, Marv Rabbi say, I'll take questions, otherwise have a great day. Yeah.
Silverware.
Thank you.
If I have a drawer which has compartments in it, like most kitchens do, have knives in one, small forks, large forks, small spoons, large spoons.
Yeah.
I take out the knives, and then I take out the forks, each one separately. That Bora?
No, it's not.
Set up the table that way?
No, that's not a problem at all, because they're not mixed. But often, sometimes people have a pile of silverware, let's say they did the dishes Friday night and they left a pile of silverware.
Oh.
So then to select from a pile of random silverware, that's the issue. But if they're sort of already sorted and they're separate, that's fine.
Peeling an orange, surely you're removing the waste from the good, so you shouldn't be able to peel an orange, because he said you have to remove the food from the waste, but with the orange, taking the peel off, nobody eats the peel.
So how you let her remove an orange? You're saying you're taking the bad from the good. Okay, that's basically the manner in which it's eaten, and there's no other way to get there. The question about the orange is, why don't we say and apply the rule that that's not called selecting, but that rather is called siluk. That is called removing something in order to get what you need. So now you may be able to so the way it's explained is that because it's a shell and a peel, it's not considered the bad from the good, but it's considered removing a barrier to get to the good is considered oichel mitoich psailas. In other words, you're right. It's a very important point that you're raising. That we said that the main criteria has to be the good from the bad. So how could you peel an orange? That's for sure the bad from the good. So we basically apply the following rule: that if it's a barrier to the food, if it's a cover, it's classified as oichel mitoich psailas.
Like pistachio nuts would be the same issue, right? Opening up because the seed, which is
any shell or any coating would be, even though you are taking the bad from the good, but since it's a barrier, so we classify that as taking the good from the bad.
Rabbi. See you tomorrow.
Can I go?
Yeah.
Rabbi Glatstein.
Yes.
Regarding the Shiur of the drawer, 5:30 is a little close.
Okay.
From home.
We'll see. We'll see if.
I can't get that. I'm not going to be able to make it this point.
Okay, I have to limit the this year to this year question, but we'll deal with it next week, Mr. Hashem. Okay, Rabbi, say.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.